Hello boys and girls, Paul Joseph Watson is a man who dedicates his life to demonising the left and Muslims at any given opportunity. He plies his trade via Twitter, YouTube and via the official fake news organisation InfoWars, home of fellow conspiracy nut Alex Jones.
I'm going to say it real slow for you. Gay frogs!
Paul is known as Prison Planet on Twitter, which is a rather apt name as he has stated on several occasions that he never leaves his property. Paul uses various yellow avatars on Twitter, which does make me think of another crazy yellow conspiracy nut, which is this guy from The Simpsons, and I'll give you 5 seconds to try and remember this guy's name. 3 seconds, and time's up. It's Herman, which is inventive, and I'm pretty sure he and quite possibly Paul are maybe modelled on this crazy guy from a film, and I just Godwin's Law this video. Oh dear, never mind. Easily offended snowflake Paul Joseph Watson reports regularly by standing in front of a map, hence the images you can see on your screen now. The reclusive rage machine has recently set his sights on, you guessed it, yet another, quote, libtard. She is a British comedian called Josie Long who dared to say in a video that she is worried about far-right extremism carried out by white people. How dare she? Paul has used this as an opportunity to create a hit piece on Josie Long, enabling the more trolling element of his fanbase to dogpile Ms. Long on Twitter and in the comments section of the original video. And most importantly of all, Paul has used Josie's words against her, turning everything around completely in order to once again demonise Islam. Ah, Paul, you never miss an opportunity, do you? Paul's video is entitled The Dumbest Liberal Ever, and he uses selected parts from Josie's video, and that's a very important thing to establish at this point. He leaves out massive, important chunks of her video. He just completely refuses to show it, and it really doesn't help his argument, that's why. The video Josie was in is called Are White People Doing Enough to Stop White Terrorism? Take it away, Paul.
I'm far more frightened of the far right than I am of Islamic terrorism.
Wait, what?
I'm far more frightened of the far right than I am of Islamic terrorism.
I'm far more frightened of the far right than I am of Islamic terrorism.
That was the start of Paul's video. 12 seconds there of essentially showing the same thing over and over again at regular and non-regular speeds. But for context, here's Josie Long's opening point in full from the video that she appeared in.
Nobody's talking about essentially the radicalisation of young white men. I'm far more frightened of the far right than I am of Islamic terrorism, because the far right is far more mainstream.
And now, for Paul Joseph Watson fans, let's speed up her last point so they can understand what she's saying.
I'm far more frightened of the far right than I am of Islamic terrorism, because the far right is far more mainstream.
Right, because far-right terrorists in the UK have killed 36 people and injured a further 212 in the last 3 months alone, haven't they? No, that's Muslims.
Okay, Paul is correct here. Terrorism by Islamic nutjobs has indeed killed 36 people and injured 212 within the last 3 months in the UK. However, on the larger scale, right-wing newspaper The Daily Telegraph shows that despite these latest attacks, relatively few people have been killed by terrorist attacks in the UK in recent years. And this table from the Global Terrorism Database shows the sheer amounts of deaths by the IRA and attacks in Northern Ireland in the latter stages of last century compared to deaths elsewhere in the UK. You can see a huge spike in 1988 due to the Lockerbie plane bombing in Scotland, which was of course carried out on the orders of Colonel Gaddafi. But since the London 7/7 bombings in 2005 up until last year, there have barely been any attacks. Some years, 0 attacks were recorded, and remember, these figures show all races and religions involved in terrorism. It's not just isolated to Islamic terror. The Telegraph states that 13 people have died because of terrorism in the UK since 2010 and 2015, obviously a 5-year period. They go on to say that agencies like MI5 have foiled countless terrorist attacks, although they don't specify the colour of the would-be perpetrators or which religion they follow, if any. But really, only Paul cares about what colour the terrorists are. And when you compare all EU countries, the UK has gone from having the most terror incidents, largely due to sectarian conflicts in Northern Ireland and the IRA, to a minuscule amount in comparison from the turn of the century onwards. The Telegraph say that over the last 10 years there have been 1.4 deaths per year in the UK due to terrorism, which, according to research from BuzzFeed, means you're more likely to be killed by dogs, 18 deaths per year, hot water, 100 deaths per year, or by using your phone whilst driving, 2,920 deaths per year. The Telegraph go on to say that despite public concern, the terror threat in Europe is relatively low. In the next part of his video, Paul Joseph Watson then expands on his UK figures to include Europe, but in a slightly different way than I did.
I'm far more frightened of the far right.
According to Europol, there were 13 jihadist attacks in Europe last year, 27 left-wing terror attacks, and just 1 right-wing attack.
Now, I'm glad Paul highlighted this report, as it's very interesting when you look at more than one single statistic, but as you'll find out soon, the report is also a little bit flawed, shall we say. 2017 EU terrorism report: 142 failed, foiled and completed attacks, 1,002 arrests and 142 victims died. The title is a bit misleading because all the data is actually from 2016, but let's look at Paul's figures in more depth. The report says attacks carried out by left-wing violent extremists has been on the rise since 2014, so Paul is correct. They reached a total of 27 in 2016, of which most, 16, were reported by Italy, although the total number of jihadist terrorist attacks decreased from 17 in 2015 to 13 in 2016, of which 6 were linked to so-called Islamic State, IS, ISIS. 35 of the 142 victims of terrorist attacks in 2016 were killed in the 13 jihadist attacks. What they're saying at the end there is that the majority of people who died from terrorism last year were due to jihadist attacks. Interestingly, Italy, Greece and Spain were the only EU member states to experience left-wing and anarchist terrorist attacks. The UK recorded 0 incidents. So what we've got there is a mixed bag of information. Some of the stats do support Paul's fear-mongering of left-wing terrorism, as it has risen recently, whereas other stats show that jihadist attacks have decreased in the same time frame. And there are many other stats, tables, graphs and so on in this report that show that maybe we shouldn't be as terrified by religious motivated terrorism as Paul would like us to be. Do have a longer look by pausing your video. The stats in the report on left and right-wing terrorist attacks shows just 2 deaths, both by right-wing terrorists. A police officer who was shot and killed in Germany, and there's the sickening murder of Joe Cox in June 2016. Also, there was a near-fatal stabbing of a German mayoral candidate in the same period. However, here is the table Paul Joseph Watson uses in his video, and despite me just showing you the crimes described, written in the report, those numbers do not feature in this table. Look at Germany and UK under the right-wing attacks column. There's nothing. How odd. Is it because Joe Cox's killer was a far-right extremist rather than just simply a right-wing extremist? Was his crime recorded as a separatist crime here? Unlikely, because there's no information in the separatists section of this report. Now, interestingly, in 2015, the previous year, the UK would not specify to Europol what political or religious persuasion terrorists were. Has that happened again? Well, no, because specific details are given in the report section. So it's all very confusing. There is one right-wing attack recorded on this table, and that happened in the Netherlands, which was an arson attack on a mosque when several worshippers were still inside, which is horrendous, obviously. But where's the Joe Cox murder in this table? It was recorded officially as a terror-related crime, despite some confusion early on. And it's only one of 2 terrorist incidents that happened in the UK last year. So I contacted Europol to find out why they've not got these stats correct, but I'm yet to receive a response. If any clever people out there do know why the stats are missing, feel free to let me and everyone else know in the comments section below. Now, I'm sure you all can see my point here. Europol's table is not representative of the information they included in their own report. It's missing key data, and Paul is able to use this incomplete table to his advantage. I'm not saying that Paul knew the data was missing, by the way. I don't think he's smart enough to spot that kind of thing. But what is clear is the information he has at hand aids his rhetoric and pushes his narrative on.
Just since Ramadan started, there's been 152 Islamic terror attacks which have killed 1,389 people all over the world. There were so many Islamic terror attacks I couldn't even fit them into a single tweet containing 4 images because the list was 5 pages long. That's just over the last 27 days.
I'm far more frightened of the far right than I am of Islamic terrorism.
That's like saying you're more frightened of a teacup chihuahua than a rabid, hungry, wild wolf, you complete fucking moron.
I have 2 problems with the stat that Paul uses here. Firstly, it's from a very biased website. The website's whole existence is to show how violent Muslims are by collating all of the jihadi attacks that have gone on around the world. It's not balanced reporting. The website's there to allow people who dislike Muslims and or Islam to confirm their prejudices. It's there to keep you angry, basically. If I want to read a story that is anti-immigration, anti-migrants, then I'd go to the Daily Express. You know, anti-Black Lives Matter stuff, saying all kinds of things about Hillary Clinton. Breitbart is the place for you if you want to look at that stuff. And here we have a website that Paul uses called, wait for it, religionofpeace.com. That lovely phrase that is uttered by conservatives and far-righters when there's been a terrorist attack or reports of violence in, for example, the Middle East by people who follow Islam. It's like Paul Joseph Watson saying, guys, I've noticed that sometimes liberals get really, really angry, and I can prove that from this article from somuchforthetolerantleft.com. Secondly, and more importantly than the previous point, the video Paul is responding to features comedian Josie Long, who asks, are white people doing enough to stop white terrorism? And then Paul gives this never-ending list of examples of global jihad and Islamic terror, which is completely irrelevant to the question that Josie asked. We all know that religious-led violence and deaths are more common in the Arabic world, so I don't see what the point Paul is making here. Surely he should be talking about white terrorism in the Middle East during Ramadan. But one imagines these occurrences are minimal or not happening at all. Most of the incidents he scrolls through happen in the Middle East, so whilst Josie Long could well be killed by events happening in these countries, they'd have to be the biggest blast range ever from a bomb in order to reach fucking London.
I'm far more frightened of the far right than I am of Islamic terrorism.
That's like saying you're more frightened of a teacup chihuahua than a rabid, hungry, wild wolf, you complete fucking moron.
Just to clarify what Paul's saying there, white terrorists and extremists are cute and fluffy like chihuahuas, but wolves, as featured on that religionofpeace.com table, who live on the other side of the globe and who blow themselves up and kill people around them from the other side of the globe, are worse than other dogs.
You complete fucking moron.
Nobody's talking about essentially the radicalisation of young white men.
Yeah, because it's not happening. Unless I missed that story where young white men were being radicalised at churches that were literally raising money for international terrorist groups.
Let's look at that screenshot Paul uses that we don't quite get a chance to analyse in his video. Nowhere here does it say that the Manchester bomber was radicalised in the premises by the men identified. I'm not disputing that he wasn't radicalised, I'm simply stating that the information that he's provided here doesn't show that to be the case. So why use this information? It's just pure conjecture from Paul, that's all it is. Now let's repeat a section of Paul's response just for 1 second, if that's okay.
Nobody's talking about essentially the radicalisation of young white men.
Yeah, because it's not happening.
I think the perfect example of radicalisation that Paul has either missed or conveniently forgotten came to a head almost exactly a year ago to the day, when the MP, Joe Cox, was stabbed and killed. The perpetrator was Thomas Alexander Mayer, and I'm going to read out some information about him. Thomas Mayer had a persecution complex, believing liberals, leftists and the mainstream media were the cause of the world's problems. Does that sound familiar to anybody at all? Mayer was a frequent user of his local library's computers, where he researched subjects such as the BNP, white supremacism, Nazism, the KKK, Israel, public shootings, serial killers and matricide, which is the act of killing one's mother, as well as Wikipedia pages of MPs, including one who was killed by a provisional IRA car bomb. Mayer was particularly fascinated by Norwegian far-right terrorist Anders Breivik and kept newspaper clippings from the Daily Mail about the case. Detective Superintendent Nick Wallen from West Yorkshire Police described Mayer as a, quote, loner in the truest sense of the word, who never held down a job, never had a girlfriend, and never had any friends. Mayer drew inspiration from nail bomber David Copeland, who wanted to start a race war by setting off bombs amongst black, South Asian and LGBT populations over a 13-day period, well over a decade ago. Police said that Joe Cox was the victim of an isolated but targeted attack. A special police unit that searched Mayer's home found Nazi regalia and far-right books. Above Mayer's bookshelf was a swastika, as well as information on how to construct bombs and explosives. Now, this is the only incident of a far-right terrorist attack in mainland UK for quite a few years. So let's expand our horizons a bit in the exact same way that Paul did to complain about Islamic deaths, so that we can include America here for 1 second. Here's a report from The Independent stating that majority of terrorists who have attacked America are not Muslim, new study finds. Donald Trump's rhetoric on radical Islamic terrorism belies the growing threat of homegrown right-wing terrorism, a new report finds. Most of the designated terrorist groups in the US are right-wing extremists and not Muslim. There were 201 designated terrorism incidents within the United States from 2008 to 2016. The results, quote, right-wing extremists were behind nearly twice as many incidents as terror attacks associated with those identified as Islamic domestic terrorism. 63 incidents were tied to Islam, ISIS, IS, whereas right-wing extremists, often white supremacists, were responsible for 115 incidents within the same period. Events like Robert Deere's killing of 3 people at a Colorado Planned Parenthood women's health clinic in December 2015 for offering abortion services would fall into that category. In terms of police action, 76% of the Islamic incidents were thwarted versus just 35% of the right-wing extremist incidents. Regarding violent extremism on the left of the political spectrum between 2008 and 2016, there were 19 incidents and 7 deaths. So Paul mentioned earlier a rise in left-wing extremism in the EU. In America, the numbers are very, very low indeed. There's an example, the recent shooting on Republican congressmen playing baseball in Alexandria, Virginia, falls into this category. Maybe, just maybe, the rise in far-right extremism in America is what's on Josie Long's mind. She's worried that people in UK towns and cities will be copying or being inspired by terrorist events by white far-right people in America.
Because the far right is far more mainstream. The far right is the Sun fucking newspaper and the consequences of that.
Yeah, last time I checked, people weren't blowing little girls up at pop concerts because of something they read in the Sun.
We'll touch upon Paul's comments about the Sun in just a second, but first, this.
The far right is Katie Hopkins, up until very recently, having a mainstream show that everyone could listen to the whole time.
Right, because when terrorists are mowing down people in a van, they're not shouting Allah Akbar, they're shouting Katie Hopkins.
You're not far wrong there, Paul. Muslim knocked unconscious by thugs who then vandalised his home with racist graffiti, quoting Katie Hopkins' final solution tweet. The victim woke from the attack to find racist graffiti daubed on his walls, which included "We need a final solution," a phrase controversially tweeted by Hopkins in the wake of the Manchester terror attack. Now, this incident happened a day before Paul's video was released, but wasn't reported on until a few days after his upload. Had this information been available to Paul, would he have mentioned the whole Katie Hopkins doesn't inspire violent acts bit? Here's a bit from Josie's video that Paul Joseph Watson did not include in his response, and it's like she can predict the future.
The far right is Katie Hopkins, up until very recently, having a mainstream show that everyone could listen to the whole time. The far right is Nigel Farage putting these posters up that are actually using the same imagery that Hitler's propaganda used. Everyone's like, the thing is, if you ignore Katie Hopkins, she'll go away. If you ignore the Sun, it'll go away. I ignore them, they've not gone away, they've got worse. If you have somebody on their Twitter calling for a final solution, it's incitement to violence, it's not acceptable, and it's not a joke. If you let Katie Hopkins get away with it, if you let Nigel fucking Farage get away with it, if you let these people get away with spewing their bile, what they do is they make other people's lives harder, and you're complicit in it.
The final solution phrase originated from the Nazis, so for the comments section, here's another template. Ah, well, I guess that makes it okay then. But aside from Katie Hopkins, when has far-right propaganda, fake news and conspiracy theories ever resulted in illegal activities and possible violent action? Well, it's never happened. Ever, except that one time when Paul Joseph Watson's colleague kept telling his idiot fan base that a child sex ring was operating from the basement of a pizza parlour, and some madman went there with a loaded gun to investigate for himself, forcing Alex Jones to apologise on air and distance himself from the nightmare he created. Apart from that one time, I can't think of another example at all.
God, these people are so evil. Excuse me, I just get so emotional.
Because the far right is far more mainstream. The far right is the Sun fucking newspaper, and the consequences of that.
Yeah, last time I checked, people weren't blowing little girls up at pop concerts because of something they read in the Sun.
Ah yes, we were going to talk about the Sun, weren't we? Now, I contacted my friend Garrett, who knows everything about logical fallacies, and he told me that Paul has just displayed a logical fallacy known as a whataboutism. And he said it's always fun being able to point out when right-wingers are doing that, since it's a fallacy made famous by the Soviet Union. Communism for the win, boys and girls. What Paul is essentially saying here, says Garrett, is, yeah, well, at least the Sun isn't as bad as the Quran, which is a stupid comparison because the Quran doesn't tell its readers to go out and murder people either. Murder is forbidden in Islam, and the punishment is the complete opposite of shagging 72 virgins in paradise.
The far right is Nigel Farage putting these posters up that are actually using the same imagery that Hitler's propaganda used.
It took us 30 seconds to descend into literally Hitler! So Jewish refugees driven from their homes under violent persecution and the fear they'd be sent to gas chambers is equally as frightening as Nigel Farage saying that 300,000 immigrants flooding into the UK every year is unsustainable.
Josie Long didn't say that Nigel Farage was literally Hitler, as Paul suggests. No one could be literally Hitler with a moustache that's that bad. Josie was saying that the propaganda Farage used was nearly identical to Nazi propaganda, which it is. Paul then goes on to defend Farage for using this imagery. Let's look closer at the original images, which are indeed Jews fleeing persecution alongside Slavs and Bolsheviks, but the words dubbed over the footage isn't exactly the same as the point Paul was making. Let's have a quick look at it. This is a BBC film, so I'm not allowed to use any of their footage on YouTube. It's not allowed by them. But what I can do is show you some still images from the original film and get my friend Rune Mian from Twitter, who's German, to translate the propaganda for you. Trigger warning, this is pretty grim stuff, but I'm going to present it to you anyway.
These are those Eastern Jewish types who, especially after the World War, flooded the major cities in West and Central Europe, where they degraded their host populations as parasites and threatened to destroy cultures that were thousands of years old. Where they showed up, they brought crime, corruption, and chaos with them.
There you go, parasites, amongst various other fucked up things from that propaganda. Something that inspired Nigel Farage to make a similar thing, which then Paul Joseph Watson defended. Great stuff. Now, maybe Paul Joseph Watson and Katie Hopkins can go round to one another's house and watch the whole documentary, because it's available on Netflix and it's called, wait for it, Auschwitz, the Nazis and the Final Solution. Wait a minute. Where have I heard that phrase before?
When I first heard about the Finsbury Park mosque attack, I was really angry and upset. People who've done nothing to anyone being harmed for the sake of hatred.
I completely agree. So you must have been equally angry when those 36 other victims were also killed for the sake of hatred, right? Let me check what she said about the Manchester attack. She must have been absolutely furious.
What a sad and horrible day.
And that's it. That's all she said about it.
I think Paul Joseph Watson is a very reasonable guy.
Yeah.
He's very articulate. He seems pretty smart.
What a sad and horrible day.
And that's it. That's all she said about it.
Paul has missed out a massive chunk of Josie's video here, where she starts talking about right-wing terrorism actually happening, in order for him to suggest that her heartfelt distress at the Manchester attacks wasn't heartfelt enough. Now, there's various amounts of people who make up fans of Paul Joseph Watson. There are a huge amount of trolls in there, and you'll see examples of them trolling Josie Long later in this video. You know, they exist to be triggered by something a liberal or a Muslim has said, and they'll go over to that website and just throw as much abuse as possible at those persons or people. But there must be an element of Paul Joseph Watson's fan base who aren't interested in screaming at strangers online, and instead take everything he says, digest it, and just become internally angry. And to those people who aren't watching his stuff just for the sake of trolling, I ask you, at this point, how are you able to like Paul Joseph Watson? He is, in my opinion, pure scum, okay? He is allowing his trolls to go after a woman for various reasons, but right here he's claiming that she wasn't sad enough about a terrorist incident, when clearly he flashes up on the screen that she is sad about it. What is Paul actually trying to say here? I can't think of one human on the planet, except for maybe the jihadist that carried out the attack, who would be happy if Manchester got bombed, you know? He's sped up her voice, he's implying she's not sufficiently sad enough. It's the lowest of all blows, you know? He's so unable to use facts and logic and real statistics to further his cause, his rhetoric, his narrative. Instead, he's got to imply that she's not sad enough. It's just fucked up beyond belief. What's he going to do next? Criticise her appearance instead of using arguments? Oh yeah, that's coming up in a minute. This is truly desperate stuff from Paul Joseph Watson. It really is. She's expressed her sadness. It was flashed up on the fucking screen in front of your eyes. What else is she supposed to do? Write a 50,000 word essay on how terrorism equals tears? I don't get it. It's just so lame, this argument from him. Now let's go over to the video that Josie was in to see her full clip from this that Paul has cherry-picked little bits from in order to attack her further.
When I first heard about the Finsbury Park mosque attack, I was really angry and upset. I think it's the very worst of humanity to attack people who are trying to worship people who've done nothing to anyone being harmed for the sake of hatred. When Jo Cox, the MP, was murdered, she was murdered by somebody who, as they committed that crime, shouted "Britain first, Britain first." Then when he's at his trial, he shouts "death to traitors, freedom for Britain." This is all around Brexit. This is all around the rhetoric that Nigel Farage whips up. You've got the Sun that lies and creates a false front page headline saying that 20% of Muslims have sympathy for jihadis, which wasn't true at all.
She's right. It was actually 25%. 2/3 of UK Muslims wouldn't inform police if they knew someone was going to join ISIS. And 32% refused to condemn those who take part in violence against those who mock the Prophet. Didn't want to mention those statistics, did you?
Paul, I'm going to take a wild stab in the dark at this one. I imagine Josie Long didn't mention the stats that you used because they weren't from the Sun's inaccurate survey. They were from a Daily Telegraph survey conducted shortly after the 7/7 attacks in London in 2005, which, if you do the maths, is a mere 12 fucking years ago. And yet, for some reason, and I'm gonna guess it's so he can continue his anti-Muslim rhetoric, but that is just a guess, boys and girls. For some reason, Paul has used the wrong information here. He's also failed again to show Josie's arguments and opinions in full. Let's have a quick look at Josie's full clip here.
You've got the Sun that lies and creates a false front page headline saying that 20% of Muslims have sympathy for jihadis, which wasn't true at all. They had to publish an apology, which they published like that big. Oh, thanks, that helps, right?
Weird that, isn't it? How Paul left out the Sun apology part because they got something so very, very wrong. This is from the BBC website. The Sun's article on 23rd of November 2015 is based upon a poll carried out after the Paris terror attacks of the same year. The Independent Press Standards Organisation, IPSO, said the coverage presented as a, quote, fact that the poll showed 1 in 5 British Muslims had sympathy for those who left to join IS or ISIS, although the questions and answers in the survey about sympathy never mentioned the ISIS group at all. As Josie pointed out, the Sun were forced to print an apology. But Tommy Robinson Mark II, otherwise known as Paul Joseph Watson, has used a completely different set of data from over a decade ago in order to defend the Sun and demonise religious brown people further. The survey that Paul quotes from was carried out by our old pals, the Daily Telegraph, in 2005 to show how divided the Muslim community was 12 years ago, just after a terrorist attack. It shows that 24% of Muslims polled had, quote, some sympathy with feelings and motives of those who carried out the 7/7 attacks, which is a very depressing number. But to use those stats 12 years later to justify a completely different set of numbers from the Sun's front page, which in itself is wrong, is just plain stupid. It's so dishonest and it's blatant scaremongering. But that anti-Muslim narrative won't push itself now, will it, Paul?
I think Paul Joseph Watson is a very reasonable guy.
Yeah.
He's very articulate. He seems pretty smart.
To think that people's opinions won't change over the course of over a decade. So people questioned, some of them, they won't even be alive anymore, for fuck's sake. Culture changes, society changes, community changes, thoughts and even ideologies change over time, you know? Now, we're not even at the halfway point of Paul's video. It's no wonder that anti-SJW, anti-feminist, anti-Muslim, anti-left-wing, alt-right, far-right people famously do absolutely no research or reading before spouting their wholly inaccurate views on camera, because it took me fucking 6 hours to collate all of the information Paul had, find all of his sources, because he doesn't include any in any links on his videos, and then refute the stupid arguments that he's made, show how he's lied or misinterpreted stats or used the wrong stats, counter-argue everything, screenshot all that information to counter-argue Paul, who is on screen for no more than 4 minutes of this 7-minute video. That's how wrong he is. It took me all that time to just show how much misinformation or blatant lies he feeds his audience. I'm fucking knackered. And we're only halfway. Oh, God. Thank you to everyone who's watched up to this point. The good news is there's only another week to go before we're fucking finished. I wish this was as easy as going, guys, the Muslim extremism threat is almost non-existent. Thanks for watching, please donate to my Patreon, but it's not. It takes fucking days to make these fucking response videos to fucking idiots. And with that in mind, please donate to my Patreon.
I'm far more frightened of young white men. They have the fucking gall to pretend they have some kind of moral high ground when there's a terrorist attack. When they show up like vultures straight away, Tommy Robinson running to Westminster.
Yeah, let me explain something. Tommy Robinson works for a media organisation as a reporter. Reporters, you know, report from the scene of breaking news events. That's how reporting works. You're not angry at him for showing up, you're angry at him because he's got a different opinion to you. Boo-hoo!
At this point, I think we need a reaction from someone who's been keeping a check on Tommy Robinson over the last couple of years. Let's go over to Dick Coughlin.
Tommy Robinson is a journalist. Kill me.
And now here's what Paul failed to show in that bit about Tommy Robinson.
People reacting to this event where somebody has fucking murdered people, and then Tommy Robinson being like, well, what goes around comes around. They have the fucking gall to pretend they have some kind of moral high ground when there's a terrorist attack. When they show up like vultures straight away, Tommy Robinson running to Westminster so he can shout his fucking mouth off. When something like this happens, then you find out what their real agenda is, because their real agenda is just perpetuating violence. And there's a double standard when it comes to how the media treats people. It's almost been as if People are trying to shame the victims of this crime. You know, they're saying, oh, well, this mosque was associated with Abu Hamza, even though there are two mosques next to each other and Abu Hamza was associated with the other mosque, not this mosque. Not to mention the fact that that was 14, 15 years ago. There's an entirely new administration at the mosque. It's disgusting, it's completely unacceptable, and it's not shown the other way around.
Yeah, there you go. A lot of stuff missing from Paul's hit piece on Josie there. Incidentally, if you want to learn more about the outlet Tommy Robinson works for, I highly recommend that you do not watch this video that I made, which will teach you absolutely nothing and has possibly the poorest production values on YouTube. I'm a 46-year-old man with 3 children. I am the definition of edge. Live from my studios in Edgware Road, Edge. What is it with gay pride? Edge. Some people describe it as trimming their pubes, but I like to call it pruning the hedge.
A white person commits a crime like this, they're a troubled loner, and there's an effort to understand them with sympathy and to talk about them in terms of mental health.
Oh, you mean like when the BBC produced a puff piece documentary about the left-wing terrorist who tried to assassinate Donald Trump, where they tried to understand him with sympathy and talked about him in terms of mental health.
Michael stated he'd wanted to shoot and kill Trump, but were these the actions of a boy with a history of mental health problems?
This is not a hardened criminal. This is just a young kid who found himself in an awful situation.
Last time I checked, Tommy Robinson or Katie Hopkins hadn't tried to assassinate a head of state or massacre Republican lawmakers, unlike left-wing terrorists.
Yeah, checkmate liberals, as long as you forget about that racist attack I told you about earlier where Katie Hopkins was quoted. Checkmate liberals. Now, the next part of Paul's video features him splicing it around a bit and changes the order of what Josie is talking about. So what we're going to do is watch about 2 minutes or more of her original video before we watch Paul's interpretation, okay?
A white person commits a crime like this, they're a troubled loner, and there's an effort to understand them with sympathy and to talk about them in terms of mental health. Now, that's not me saying that that isn't a good idea. Whenever anyone commits a crime, we've got to try and be as humane as possible in response to it. It's just ironic that they demonise the people at this mosque, when what happened was this man screamed that he wanted to kill all of them, committed acts of violence, horrific fucking acts of violence to people, and what the imam managed to do was keep people calm, restrain him, make sure that no harm came to that person. It's better than violence. It's giving humanity to people even when they're offering you nothing back. That level of compassion and humanity in an instance like that is kind of amazing. All of this is all about othering people. It's about taking people's humanity away from them. It's about pretending that you can't empathise with people when in actual fact those people are exactly like you.
I'm far more frightened of the far right.
Surely, this can't get any dumber. Surely she's not going to start blaming Islamic terror attacks on toxic masculinity.
Toxic masculinity. Male violence is a problem in our society.
Oh, you mean male violence like acid attacks, honour killings, beatings and stoning female rape victims to death? That kind of male violence? Yeah, it's only a problem in certain societies though, isn't it? The very ones that you refuse to talk about.
Interesting use of the words refuse to talk about, seeing as Josie's video is called Are White People Doing Enough to Stop White Terrorism? It's almost as if she's not making a video in order to demonise Muslim communities and focusing on something else entirely.
It's just ironic that they demonise the people at this mosque.
So you're whining about Muslims being collectively demonised as terrorists, having introduced this very video by collectively demonising all white men as terrorists.
Young white men.
Young white men. Young white men.
Again, you're a fucking moron.
What? All white men are terrorists? But I'm a white man. Some speeded up clips clearly show Josie Long is saying that we are all terrorists. Look, let's play it again.
Nobody's talking about essentially the radicalisation of young white men. I'm far more frightened of the far right than I am of Islamic terrorism, because the far right is far more mainstream. Nobody's talking about essentially the radicalisation of young white men. I'm far more frightened of the far right than I am of Islamic terrorism, because the far right is far more mainstream.
All white men are terrorists. There, she said it, using completely different words from those, but you can tell what she meant by looking in her eyes.
All of this is all about othering people. It's about taking people's humanity away from them. Young white men.
It's just ironic.
Who is this idiot anyway? Oh, it's a privileged, Oxford-educated, Corbynista, Guardian-reading, lovey UK comedian celeb living inside the M25 lefty bubble who's butthurt about Brexit. Imagine my shock. She's newly single.
I'm frightened of men.
This is what social justice does to you girls. Just say no.
Privileged, Oxford-educated, Corbynista, Guardian-reading, lovey, UK comedian celeb living inside the M25 lefty bubble who's butthurt about Brexit. Thanks to that Paul Joseph Watson, a man who can afford to live in London, aka inside the M25 lefty bubble, whose conservative heroes were mostly educated at either Oxford or Cambridge, who is a Guardian reader too. I mean, he even flashed up the fact that he read a Guardian article on his fucking screen. Oh, and he is also a comedian too, just like Josie. I mean, look at some of these comedy gems from Paul. Also, imagine my shock that a far-right commentator was reduced to insulting an opponent's appearance. That's very rational of you, Paul. And I know I'm using this Simpsons image and maps to mock Paul myself, but what I'm doing here is comparing him to fellow conspiracy nuts who are also yellow, like Paul's Twitter avatars. What I'm not doing is suggesting that he acts and looks like a massive virgin with no friends, because that would be wrong.
You can definitely link these things to wider problems. One of those things is probably down to the fact that male violence is a problem in our society. Men are put under immense pressure. Men are alienated. It's very difficult to live up to certain ideals of what it means to be a man in this society because they're bullshit. Me talking about the far right and then me saying things like toxic masculinity. I mean, I'm just begging for people to abuse me online here, but it's about vulnerable people being targeted by extremists and exploited and made to do terrible things because they've got no one they feel they belong to. And the problem with the sort of ideology that someone like Thomas Mayer or this man who's committed this crime at the mosque, the problem with those is they're not true about what people are. I think human nature is complicated, life is complicated, but I think deep down, people want to love each other and look after each other, if that doesn't sound too hippie. And so these people can't succeed in the long term and we have to not allow them to.
Paul ends his hit piece with a compilation of terrorist attacks carried out in the name of Islam, something that doesn't appear in Josie's video, but he does loop Josie's voice over them like a grown man would. His final point is his only point, that Muslims are bad. Therefore, to help him out, I've added some text to his footage to really ram that point home.
This is what social justice does to you girls. Just say no.
I'm far more frightened of the far right than I am of Islamic terrorism. I'm far more frightened of the far right than I am of Islamic terrorism. I'm far more frightened of the far right than I am of Islamic terrorism. I'm far more frightened of the far right than I am of Islamic terrorism. I'm far more frightened of the far right than I am of Islamic terrorism. I'm far more frightened of the far right than I am of Islamic terrorism. I'm far more frightened of the far right than I am of Islamic terrorism.
I'm far more frightened of the far right than I am of Islamic terrorism.
You're an idiot!
What could be more triggering to libtards than my face and this slogan? Get your new premium quality "Conservatism is the new counterculture" t-shirt right now at InfoWarsStore.com and let the butthurt commence.
$25 for a shirt, or £20 in British money. That is a very reasonable price to pay for tat, isn't it? Can every Paul Joseph Watson fan buy one of these t-shirts so that we can spot you a mile off and avoid you, please? Also, as I mentioned in a previous video, conservatism is not the new counterculture. Young people voting Labour is a new counterculture.
Yo. Hey. Hey. Oh, Jeremy Corbyn. Hey. Hey, hey, hey. Hey, hey, hey. Hey. All right, Glastonbury, this is what it's about right now, man.
And before I wrap up this video, the last thing I want to say about Josie Long in particular is give you some information about her, because she's a very, very funny comedian who's been going for many years and has many achievements. I want to just give you a bit of a bio about her and show you how she reacted to all of the insults and dogpiling that came her way after Paul made his hit piece video. She handled it really well. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for watching. Before I go, I'd just like to do two things. First of all, I'd like to say thank you to the following people. Sonia from An Actual Joke, who you can follow on Twitter, or via her YouTube channel where she makes some great videos such as these. Thank you very much to Garrett for helping me out with some logical fallacies. He's got some exciting projects coming up, including a new channel, so I recommend that you follow him on Twitter for all the updates. Thank you to Dick Coughlin for laughing at Tommy Robinson, as we all should do. He's obviously on YouTube and Twitter as well. Thank you to Rune Mayan. I should have checked with you before doing this how to pronounce that last name of yours. He read out the horrific stuff in a very dramatic German accent when it came to the Nazi propaganda piece. Follow him on Twitter. And I'll be honest, I also had a bit of a struggle coming up with a title for this video, so I asked people on Twitter for their suggestions. Here are a couple of really good examples flashing up on your screen now. Thank you very much to all of you. But in the end, I went with one of No Known Future's various suggestions here. The top one, Paul Joseph Watson in Lie Hard. Thank you very much to him. He's really worth a follow on Twitter, so do so, please. And if you've enjoyed this video, you can obviously leave a comment in the comments section below, or maybe you'd like to contact me on Twitter. The address is ASM_antisocial. If you've liked the video, you can press like, which gets it shared to social media, or you can physically share it below as well. Or you can go one stage further, like these lovely, lovely people have, and give me a little bit of money for making these videos. Think of it as a tips jar, just to say, I enjoy that, mate. Here's $1.
We've no place to go. Let it snow, let it snow, let it snow.
You can either pledge a one-off payment of $1, $2, however much you want via PayPal, links are below and at the end of the video, or you can set up a regular monthly payment of $1 or thereabouts via Patreon, where you will receive some very, very shit rewards as well. Links are below and at the end of the video as well. And here is a list of people who've given me some of their hard-earned cash. Shapeshifting Lizard, Mark from Tasmania, the International Cheese Eater, Rebecca Beard, James Manning, Dom Trisardi. And we need to enter the echo chamber to thank the other people who've donated to my Patreon. Thank you to Michael Rowlands, the Woolly Bumblebee, and Christy Winters. And finally, an extra special thank you to the very, very generous Nicholas. I heart you! Thanks for watching, guys. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, laters, betas.